Good evening. My name is Paul Feuerstein. I am the co-chair of the Episcopal Diocese of New York's Task Force on Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault. We've been working for the last 10 years, particularly starting with domestic violence, because we know that 1 in 3 women in our pews are victims, to equip clergy and lay leaders through trainings to be able to better address issues, because we know that 70% of people go to their faith leaders first. And we have expanded our scope in having webinars, both in April for Sexual Assault Awareness Month, in October for Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and during the International 16 Days of Gender Justice, starting in November. To be able to add our voices to so many voices, and to make the case that we are concerned about victims. We developed a bathroom sign for all of our churches so people know you are not alone. There are resources. There are people there to listen and to help. And that's what we're all about. And now I turn over the program to the Reverend Dr. Victoria Jean Rollins, co-chair with me, who will be our host this evening.
Good evening to everyone in Zoom land. We're very, very honored to have you join us. And we hope that this program will be as meaningful to you as it has for us to prepare for it. We are thanking you for your commitment to attending tonight, even though the topic is not an easy one to hear. So we thank you for your courage. And we're also going to thank some very special people in the diocese, the Bishop Andrew M.L. Dici, whose vision started our task force 10 years ago, or 10 plus, as well as Bishop Alan Shin and Bishop Mary Glasspool and Bishop-elect Matthew Hyde. All of those mentioned have been in many different ways supportive of our work to end domestic violence, sexual assault, and bring in gender equity. So we thank them and all of the administrators. We also have a special thank you tonight because we are going to be joined very briefly, but importantly, by New York's Commissioner, Cecile Noel, who is the Commissioner Extraordinaire for Gender Justice and Gender Equity. And without any further introduction, she has won awards and is a remarkable human being in her own right, as well as fiercely, tirelessly an advocate for all in New York City and beyond. So we're going to ask our wonderful tech team to roll the tape, as some people say.
Hello, my name is Cecile Noel, and I am the Commissioner of the Mayor's Office to End Domestic and Gender-Based Violence, or NGBV. The city is here to do everything we can to end sexual violence and to support survivors. We are grateful the Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Task Force of the Episcopal Diocese is holding this panel. NGBV values the support of faith communities in addressing domestic and gender-based violence issues and creating safe spaces for survivors of any age to seek meaningful support. If you or anyone you know is experiencing sexual violence, visit one of the city's family justice centers for free and confidential help. Call 311 and ask for the nearest FJC or visit nyc.gov/NYCHope. We are here to support you. There is help, and you are not alone.
We thank Commissioner Noel for her tireless work and joining us tonight. I wish to recall the words of two great statesmen in setting the tone for tonight. It was President John F. Kennedy who said, quote, "Our children are our greatest treasures and its best hope for the future." He was joined by President Mandela, who also said, Those who abuse them tear at the fabric of our society. Our sacred scriptures from all traditions have dire words as well. In the stillness of the moment, let's share with respectful, open hearts and lives tonight, to God and to one another and to ourselves, observing a minute of silence at this time to remember and honor all victims of sexual assault and child abuse, those whose lives have been wounded, scarred, and diminished for the rest of their lives, as well as those who have been murdered. Please join me in bowing your head for a minute. And now it is my honor and joy to introduce the esteemed panelists that are with us tonight. I'm sorry, I had a recording that just went off in the background. I had to figure out what that was. Okay, so let me start again. It is still my honor and unmitigated joy to introduce the esteemed panelists that you see on your screen, who are joining me, giving their own gift of their time, talents, and expertise. You will have a chance to become an opportunist to share your own voice later on in the program. Rest assured, we have a question and answer period. Please remember, out of respect for everyone, because we want to hear as many voices as we can, to frame your question as that question. We'll do our best to answer as best we can, and the panelists will just jump in, whoever feels called to answer it, unless one of our guests has a specific question directed to one of your panelists. So we're going to open our program officially, our panel part, with the remarkable, inspirational Dr. Gilbert Kleiman, whose CD has, in my opinion, probably one of the world's records as the most accomplished in his young years on this earth. Dr. Kleiman has devoted his entire life to how to help us all love children. He helps us with his voice. He helps us with showing how to be a responsive person towards children in action, and by his wisdom and study and hard work, to be one of the most remarkable experts in the field of children. He's also a very well-known forensic expert, tirelessly going from coast to coast and shore to shore, working on behind the scenes settling in courts with lawyers to provide compensation and security for victims of heinous crimes. And they all are, whether they make it to court or not. I know Dr. Kleiman would work with every single person if he could. So without any more ado, please, I will call upon Dr. Gilbert Kleiman.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me well. I would like to introduce you to the idea that we hate children. It is my expectation tonight that I will teach you that there is a force in society called childism. It is a prejudice against children, whether within the workings of a group, an institution, a government, or society, like other forms of prejudice, such as racism, misogyny, homophobia. It produces many psychological and physical harms to the targets and the perpetrators of this prejudice, and it handicaps the entire human species. Jesus was very much aware of the tendency, which I think is properly called evil, the tendency to harm the souls of children who are helpless to resist the evil with which adults can confront them. Jesus was rarely angry. He was rarely punitive. But in Luke 17:2 and Matthew 18:6, he is said to have stated that it would be better if a millstone were hung around the neck and he be cast into the sea, if there is one amongst us who would cause one of the little ones whom I love to fall into sin. This tendency of us as a species to harm our own children is expressed in our negligence of climate change, our negligence of the toxins in our environment, and it's expressed in our budgets. Very little of the United States gross domestic product goes for the welfare of children. It is estimated lately as around a paltry 9% invested in our futures. Although he advocated the importance of children, President Kennedy gave much more money to the space program. And it is true now that while only 9% of the federal budget helps children, there is a much larger portion of the budget that helps build aircraft carriers, airplanes to kill people, and tanks to kill people. In my career, now I'm at age 93, and I have been practicing medicine and a branch of it called child psychiatry, and a branch of that called forensic psychiatry for children, which I have testified in almost 400 cases, mostly against perpetrators of evil against children. The results have been enormous punishment and pain and financial consequences for the perpetrators, who sadly have often been Catholic dioceses. I opened the cases against Catholic dioceses before it was generally known that there were scandals and tragedies. Thousands of children have been the subject of my testimony. In the Archdiocese of Dallas, the Archdiocese of Los Angeles, San Diego, Oakland, and some in Yakima, Washington. Also, children in foster care are regularly abused by foster parents who, for the most part, like most priests, are keepers of the souls of the children. But there are many foster parents who sexually abuse their children. This is a terrible thing because there are, in any given year, over 670,000 children who spend time in foster care in our nation alone. Within our nation, there are thousands and thousands of children who are in juvenile jails, where their souls are often ground into dust. In our state, the state pays the highest price in the nation to house a single child in a prison, $892,000 a year for a child to be kept in a prison for a year. We have not come very far from the ancient Incas who sacrificed children in ritual fashion. We sacrifice them through our governmental institutions at great cost to our society. During our centuries of slavery, Black children were torn from their mothers. They were treated as objects, as property, and they were given horrible punishments as children. Today, I will just briefly share with you a video of the kind that I show to juries, in which I interview children and sometimes grown-ups who are remembering what happened to them as children in foster care, a very common place for children to suffer. So I will just show you a few moments about 3 African-American brothers who characteristically of abuse in foster care were abused by white people. It is for this reason that I'm bringing an expert witness service to Harlem at a new agency called the Harlem Family Services, a division of the Harlem Psychoanalytic Institute. I want there to be voices for the African-American children who all too often are abused by white and other foster parents. So I will share with you now a terrible video, which I won't show in its entirety, but only show you that it's real. So I'm hoping, can you see now? If you put your thumbs up, I'll know you can see a video. Can you see it? It's on my screen. Nobody's put their thumb up, but I hope you can.
Yes.
See. Oh,
yes.
good. Thank you. All right. So this is an example of terrible failure. 3 brothers who were forced to have sex with each other in abominable fashions, were forced to eat feces, were forced like slaves to perform sexual services for their adult foster mother. This could have been 300 or 400 years ago when it was happening regularly as part of the services of slaves. But here they are talking to me as adults and telling me what was sufficient for me to get verdicts for them of millions of dollars from the Washington State Department of Child and Family Care, which is responsible for the well-being of foster children.
One and done. This was a punishment that was like one of her favorite punishments.
She bit, you know, to come shower time, right? It'll be dark in the bathroom. And she'll like do this for fun. And it'll be dark in the bathroom. She'll talk one by one. She'll call her name, you know, close the door. It'll be dark, the shower will be running. And what she'll do is she'll take apart, we'll be butt naked, she'll take apart parts and, you know, bite the tip really hard.
Wow.
And then, you know, to the point where we're bleeding.
One night, my brother, the oldest, got in trouble, and she was biting his penis.
That's all I'm
Screaming.
going to show you because it's too horrible, but you got the idea.
She would
That-
bite, tug,
I have to learn how to
and she would grab it, hold
shut
on
that
as
off.
hard as she could.
Yeah, I can do it. Okay, well, this is going on around us, besides us, in our neighborhoods, and it's happening particularly to African American children. I beg you to consider that those children have rights, that they are citizens of the world, and we must protect them, and we must, as Jesus, be angry for them. We must give them a voice. And I hope if you know or suspect such children are in your orbit, that you will refer them to the Harlem Family Institute and its soon to be opened forensic expert services, which I am going to personally direct and bring justice to more and more children in our otherwise wonderful community. I thank you for having invited me, and I appreciate very much your desire to improve the souls of our species, which needs so much improvement and more devotion to its future in the form of its children. Again, I thank you, and especially Victoria, for having invited me. That's all I think I should say today.
Dr. Kleiman, it always moves me sometimes to outrage, sometimes to tears, and sometimes to joy when I listen to your wisdom. And I remember that you embody the advocacy that we are all aspiring to. And I thank you with all my heart, mind, and soul.
You're so welcome.
And I'm grateful to Harlem Family Institute as well. That has given me an opportunity to do further studies in psychoanalysis. And so I would like to honor that connection. Otherwise, I would not have had the incredible opportunity to meet Dr. Kleiman. So we are very blessed to be in his presence, and he has a myriad of books. So the learning doesn't end here, and he is very accessible despite his incredibly busy schedule. So don't be shy if you feel you want to make a connection. Dr. Kleiman is very busy. You may have to wait a while, but you will never be turned away. And that, again, is a wonderful example of how a human being is meant to be to one another. So thank you again, Dr. Kleiman. Look forward to having you back as many times as your schedule permits. We're going to turn the panelist progression to another person that has a story that will pull at your heartstrings and also make you very afraid and angry at the same time. It's not an easy story to hear. It is a true story. And it is with great humility that I introduce Ms. Jacqueline Franchetti, who has been brave and determined and very much a pioneer in taking on the family, and I sort of stumble on the word, the family justice system, because with every part of my being, I think it's very badly misnomed at times. It is sometimes painfully unjust beyond words, not always, but the story, the truth you're about to hear that Jacqueline is willing to share, which must tear at the fabric of her every cell in her body, is the murder of her beloved daughter, Kira. I speak as a mother. She is living the hell that all parents who love their children fear, particularly the marginalized, particularly Black and brown, sometimes Asian, sometimes Jewish. But I want you to hear her words, not mine. So without any further ado, other than to say heartfelt thank you to Jacqueline. She's going to tell you about her life, her advocacy for Kira's law, Kira's champions, and I hope you will consider joining her. So wait for her slide as well. Yes, you can do something about it. Thank you, Jacqueline.
Thank you, Victoria, for those beautiful words, and Reverend Paul and all of the wonderful panelists that you're going to hear from tonight. And thank you, by the way, just for being here. You know, violence thrives in silence, and by being a part of tonight, and I know some of the information that you're hearing and some of the stories that are all true are hard to hear, but violence thrives in silence. And today, tonight, together, we are breaking the sound barrier. So thank you for being here, and thank you for being part of this. You know, as women, we're told to leave abusive relationships to get out. And we're practically shamed if we don't. And I did leave. I got out of a horribly abusive relationship, and I left to protect my daughter when I was pregnant with her from her abusive father. But here's the thing, we're not told, when we're told to leave these abusive relationships, we're not told what happens, what the next chapter is. Because when you have a child with your abuser, and once you enter our family court system in New York or around the country, the abuse will not end. It will get exponentially worse, thanks to the continued failings, like Victoria mentioned, of our quote unquote judicial justice system. And tonight, what I'd like to talk to you about is first what happened to me and to Kira from the first moment we walked in the door of our family court system. I want to tell you about Kira's law, because there is hope that's here. And I want to tell you about some ways, easy ways that you can get involved in terms of changing this system to better protect survivors and victims and family violence, whether they're women or children or men, to make sure that our court system acts the way that it's supposed to and protect our children. You know, like you probably at home, I thought the first time that I walked into, I'm from Long Island, Nassau County Family Court, I thought the judge would be there to protect Kira, to put her safety first. And that can't be farther from the truth. Kira's safety was never a priority throughout her entire custody case, and it started when she was born until she was 2 years old. And when I walked into Nassau County Family Court the first time, and I came forward and told the judge that I was being stalked, threatened, harassed, I was, we're talking about tonight about cyber threats. He bugged my phone, my Wi-Fi. He knew every move I was going to make before I made it. Every phone call I made, he listened to. And when I shared all these things with the judge, her response, rather than telling him to cut it out, was she yelled at me to quote unquote grow up. That was her response. We had Child Protective Services involved. They noted that he had extreme anger and rage issues, an inability to care for Kira at a young age when she was only 9 months old. And they labeled it no risk and no domestic violence. I had mental health professionals who were involved. They saw documented evidence, heard from other eyewitnesses about what was going wrong, how he was hurting not just me, but Kira. And in their report, even though they knew, everyone knew from day one that he was suicidal, the mental health professional said that, quote unquote, we should have joint custody because a father should always play a role in a child's life. In a healthy breakup, I would agree. In an abusive one, absolutely not. We had an attorney for a child who I begged repeatedly to get more involved in Kira's case. She was coming back. She was showing signs of distress. I was terrified for myself. I was terrified for her. He refused even 5 days before she was killed. And at our last court hearing, when I again came forward with things being really wrong and I was scared for myself and for Kira, the judge said, quote unquote, this is not a life or death situation. And days later, he took her to Virginia, where he shot her not once, but twice in the back while she slept, poured gasoline all over his home, and killed Kira in a murder-suicide. And her murder was entirely preventable. And in the 6 years since Kira has been murdered, I'm here to tell you that I've passed laws in multiple states and on the federal level to protect children in custody cases. And today, I'm very thankful to tell you that hope isn't on the horizon in New York State. Hope is here. Hope is here in the form of Kira's Law. And Kira's Law is a bill that I've been working with many wonderful domestic violence organizations, including Safe Horizon, who's here tonight, and I believe Maureen's speaking right after me. But with wonderful input from all around New York State to better protect our children. And Kira's Law does 3 things. First of all, it makes the child's safety the top priority in a custody case. Now, you would think and hope this is happening, but it's not. And so we're going to change that with Kira's Law. Now, the second thing that Kira's Law will do is it mandates judge training. Our judges are not properly trained, nor are they properly skilled when it comes to assessing family violence or child abuse cases. They're working with the right skill set, and they're making life and death decisions, and they're getting it wrong. Kira is one of 23 children since 2016 to be murdered by a parent, an abusive parent, while going through a custody case or divorce in New York. That's a horrible number. And that number, by the way, doesn't even take into account all of the children who are court-ordered into a home where they're being abused today. That is happening at staggering rates, at epidemic rates. And we can change that. And then the third thing that Kira's Law does is it stops common practices that allow abusers to gain custody. So for example, in my case, they kept saying, well, just because he abused you doesn't mean he'll abuse Kira, which makes no sense whatsoever. So Kira's Law is a common sense solution. It has wide bipartisan support from Democrats and Republicans. We don't hear about bipartisan elements going on. This is one. And we're trying to get the Kira's Law passed this year. And what I'm going to do right now in the chat, for those of you who are at home, if you go to this URL, kiraslaw.org, and just type in your snail mail address, it'll take you 10 seconds, 15 if you're a slow typer. You can easily support Kira's Law. I will send emails to your lawmakers, and let me tell you, they pay attention to these emails that you send. So if I can have one ask of you, it's to do that tonight before you go to sleep right now while you're online, type in Kira's Law and make that happen. Kira's Champions, by the way, is an organization that is for students and by students, for kids and by kids. So while I'm here tonight, I have an army of students that is working behind the scenes to make Kira's Law a reality. And we're doing something incredible. In just 10 days, on Bereaved Mother's Day, everybody knows Mother's Day is May 14th, but on Bereaved Mother's Day, which is May 7th, the Sunday before, in Buffalo and Long Island, students are coming together, and we're going to have 23 students who are each going to run a mile while pushing Kira's stroller with her Elmo doll in it to raise awareness for Kira's Law and the dire need to change our family court system. What happened to me can happen, unfortunately, to someone you know and love unless changes are made. And we are going to work together to make sure we pass Kira's Law this year, we make it a reality. And if you have anyone in your family, by the way, who wants to be part of our Mother's Day effort, we're also offering it virtual. So students can get involved no matter where they are. If they're not in Long Island or Buffalo, New York, they can still be part of that. And I'll type that in the chat. And we'd love to have you join us. Kira's Law is a common sense solution that can move mountains for so many of us. And I'd love you to be part of this as we go about this in the future.
Jacqueline, thank you for your courage to love children beyond your own child who's so tragically not with you. We weep with you. We are angry with you, and we're here to support you. A lot of people love you already, Jacqueline, and I think after this presentation, they're going to love you even more. So please let us know how we can be helpful. Thank you for sharing from your heart, a very, very powerful part of your life, and your wisdom and your courage to help all the children of the world, despite the tragedy that you live with every day. We offer prayers and dedication that we too can join you. Thank you. And now we turn to Miss Maureen Curtis. Maureen is probably one of the longest advocate friends I've had since I came to New York. And she is now Senior Vice President of the Legal Services for Safe Horizon, which is one of the premier nonprofit agencies that, yes, you can turn to for a myriad number of services, and they're all excellent. So I'm going to give the mic to you, Maureen, with a very grateful heart for your years of service and your dedication and your support of our program in the Diocese of New York. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Victoria, and thank you, Jacqueline, for sharing, for being so courageous, and for sharing your story, and for being a change maker in so many people's lives, in so many children's lives. As mentioned, I work for Safe Horizon. Safe Horizon is the largest victim services agency in the country, and we work with all victims of crime and abuse in New York City, and that includes children, adults, families. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the services that we provide specifically for children. But first, I just want to say that I had never heard of the term childism before, and it's something that, I will be thinking of for a long time, because I do think, and what really struck me about what you said, Dr. Kleinman, is how we don't support our children, and it's expressed in our budgets. And one of the programs that I'm going to talk about is so poorly funded, and yet it's such a valuable program for children and their caretakers, often the mom. And I think "You are not alone" is also something that struck me, because we say that all the time, and it's so true that survivors are not alone, whether they're a child survivor, whether they're an adult survivor, that there are people that are here to help them, whether it's providers such as Safe Horizon, or it's faith-based leaders such as so many of you that are here tonight. It struck me that I think the stat was 78% of survivors turn to their faith-based leaders. And we know that to be true. They turn to their faith-based leaders, they turn to their family and their friends before they turn to systems or organizations such as Safe Horizon. So before I tell you a little bit about the services, I just want to give you some stats about when there's violence in the home. Families under stress produce children under stress. If a spouse is being abused and there are children in the home, the children are affected by the abuse. And we know that to be true. Many of you have probably heard of the ACEs study, and we know that ACEs, that the trauma, so many different types of trauma have an impact on children, and not just mentally and socially, but physically as well as they grow into adulthood. And that's why, turning or helping them is so critical, whether it's, helping them as a friend or a family member, or whether it's helping them in the system. And yes, Jacqueline, what you said about the systems is so true. For many years, I have overseen programs working in courts, family courts, criminal courts, police precincts, and oftentimes the systems that are there to help, not only do they not help, they often cause more harm. Each year, an estimated 3.3 million children are exposed to violence against their mothers or female caretakers by family members. Now, that doesn't mean to say that it's not the father who is being abused, but we know that predominantly in relationships of a heterosexual, it is predominantly the woman who is the violent, particularly when we are talking about lethal violence. Studies show that child abuse occurs in 30 to 60% of family violence cases that involve families with children. Once again, think about that, 30 to 60% child abuse. And when we talk about child abuse, we're often talking about physical abuse or sexual abuse. That doesn't take into account the psychological abuse that is there. A child's exposure to the father abusing the mother is the strongest risk factor for transmitting violent behavior from one generation to the next. We know that if there aren't interventions, and once again, the intervention doesn't have to be the system, doesn't have to be an agency like Safe Horizon, it's family or friends, it's teachers, it's people stepping in and saying that this is not okay, that can have the most change if we really say that this is not okay. I always think about, where is the outrage when it comes to domestic violence? Yeah, I grew up in an age where, if you think about drinking and driving, if you were drinking and you got into the car, very rarely did you get pulled over. And if you did, the cop might tell you, take a walk, take your keys or tell you to walk home, but you didn't get arrested. Even if there was a crash, you did not get arrested. There weren't consequences for your actions. Then Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, Students Against Drunk Drivers, and it became more the norm that you did not drink and drive. And because also laws changed, so that if you were drinking and driving and there was an accident or a crash, there are going to be serious consequences for what may have happened. And I think what's most important here is not the changes in the law, because we've seen so many changes in domestic violence, but the changes in people saying it is not okay. So now when I grew up, I mean, this is probably going to be terrible to say, but you would think nothing of getting into a car with somebody who was under the influence, who was even drunk, and you would think nothing of driving in their car with them. Now, when young people go out, they have designated drivers, and they will take away their keys and tell them not to drive. That's what we need to have happen when we see violence, is to step in and say that that's not okay, and provide support for that survivor, and provide support even for the person causing harm, because that ultimately will help the survivor, could help the person causing harm, and it will help the children as well. So let me just take a couple of minutes to tell you a little bit about some of the programs that we have. So I think that one of the things, we are a client-centered, trauma-informed organization. And what we have learned over the years is that what survivors have told us, and when I talk about survivors, I'm talking about adult as well as children. The first thing is to believe. Because so many people do not believe them, whether it's a child who's come forward and says that, harm is happening, or they're being hurt in some way, or whether it's a survivor of domestic violence or sexual violence who's come forward and says. So, believe that person. Listen to that person. There was recent studies that research that has been done where they spoke with survivors here in New York City as well as across the country. And what the survivors said, that the most important thing that anybody could do for them, barring any type of service, was just to listen to them in a non-judgmental way, and also to support them. And not to support them in the way that we think we should be supporting them, but support them in the way that they are telling us that they want that support. So as I mentioned, Safe Horizon is a very large organization. We have so many programs that that are co-located with the criminal justice system. We have staff in precincts, in the family court, in the criminal courts, in the family justice centers. A couple of the programs I want to mention specifically, just very quickly, that work specifically with children. We have children's centers in the courts that are in all 5 family courts and in criminal court. Every court should have a children's center. And this is a safe place where the child can go, whether they're involved in the court case, their parent is involved in the court case, and it doesn't matter if the parent is there because they are the person causing harm or they are the survivor. They can check their child into the children's center for a couple of hours, a couple of days, whatever the need is there, and it takes the child out of that courtroom. And this service can be as simple as just having a child-friendly area where the child can play. Also in the courts, and this is the program that I was talking about, that is severely underfunded, and not just in Safe Horizon, across the state, across the country. And this is a supervised visitation program. This is a program where if the court believes that the child or the survivor, in most cases it's because of violence in the home, is not safe, they can come and we supervise the visits so that the non-custodial parent, oftentimes it is the abusive father, can see that child in a setting where they can, it's a safe place and safe for both the survivor and the child. And it also is good for the child, because child will want to see, or oftentimes wants to see, dad. And oftentimes the surviving mother wants the child, but they just want it to be in a safe place so they don't have to worry about their safety or their child's safety. We also have the child advocacy centers where we provide wraparound services. It's fully disciplinary for children who have been severely physically abused or sexually abused. There's one in every borough, and these are centers that provide, as I said, wraparound services, and they work not just with the children, but the family members, because sometimes it could be a family member who has caused the harm. They'll work with the family member or members who are not involved in the violence that was perpetrated against that child. And then we also do a lot of therapeutic counseling. We have a clinic where they provide therapeutic counseling, and at one time, I don't quote me on the stats now, 50% of their clients were children. So they provide children, and this is trauma-informed services. And once again, they work with the child as well as with the caretaker. And then the last program I will mention is one of our newest programs, which is called the Child Trauma Response Team. And these are therapists, licensed social workers that respond to work with children who have been exposed to serious violence in the home. And they come in shortly after they've been exposed to that serious violence and provide a evidence-based treatment that's 6 to 8 sessions for the child. Also, once again, working with the caretaker, because we can't just work with the children without working with mom or dad or other family members, because they're the ones who are going to be there 24/7 with that child. And this treatment has been shown to have a significant impact in reducing PTSD and depression in children. And the other thing, when I first heard about this evidence-based treatment, is that if the child needs ongoing therapy, it is more likely that they are going to connect with a therapist than if they were just referred directly by, say, an advocate who's working with that family. So I just want to say that thank you so much for inviting me here. I'll be here the whole time to answer any questions that we might have. And once again, I really appreciate that I know this is the 10th anniversary that this is happening, has been happening for 10 years, because we know we can't do it alone. And it's working together that we can have the most impact in helping children and helping adult survivors and families and communities. So thank you very much.
Maureen, that was a very helpful and powerful presentation. You always have worthwhile things to say. Thank you for sharing your expertise. You made wonderful points. In the interest of time, I'm not going to elaborate several of the ones, except to mention the connection that I've heard here tonight from all of them, that our wonderful technological progress has also a dark side, and that people who had some safety before have had their own vulnerabilities broadcast through the detriment of the technologies that sometimes keep us connected. They often harm and alienate. And I know our wonderful panelist who's bringing in the last of the guard for tonight, and that will be Attorney Andrew Santa Ana. He's going to talk particularly directed to the work that he does with dating violence and the impact of social media, et cetera. But Maureen Safe Horizon is a wonderful source, and I hope that our guests will feel that they have heard more hope tonight than despair. If we have that result, then we've done our job, because there's always hope if there is empowerment of people's voices and working together. So thank you, Maureen. Thank you for many, many years of service, and they're not over yet. And next, last of wonderful storytellers, I would say, on this panel, as well as advocates, is the Reverend Canon Patero Sabuni. And like Dr. Kleiman and Maureen and Jacqueline, he has many more words to say than we have time for. But I'm going to ask him to speak particularly from his role personally in his family. He is a survivor in his family of family violence. We've talked about intergenerational trauma briefly. We've talked about family system therapy as well as trauma. And I think we have much to learn from our beloved friend Patera, who's spent many, many, many years in tireless service of advocacy, both to individuals and to groups. So without further ado, I'm turning the mic to Reverend Canon Patero Sabuni with great joy.
Thank you. It's a great joy to be here. I want to thank Maureen and Jackie, Dr. Kleinman, for those presentations that we need to do more. All of us need to do more. As we just heard from Maureen, we can do more. And that what Jackie said was all of us can join this fight. And Dr. Kleiman reminded us that we hate children. I've never heard quite that put that way, but he's absolutely right. We hate children, and the budgets reflect it. When people say we love children in church, the question you ask is, let me see your budget. How much time do you spend? Do you spend more on Easter flowers than the children? Do you spend more on music than on children? We have, at our church, the church where I am right now, we have a youth ministry, the warden that you saw come help me with this, on Saturday. And we started this during COVID because they were stuck on their screens every day. They were stuck on the screens at home. So we started this music program. We're next to playground. So they come, play chess, play piano, get music, play basketball outside. It's amazing what happens. I'm a father, I'm a grandfather, and I pick up my son, my 7-year-old son, on Tuesday. So earlier today, I was at Bank Street School to pick him up. I walk him down to 72nd. Well, we take the subway. We take the subway down to 72nd for his baseball, West Side baseball in New York. And as I waited for him, a baby comes in a stroller, a baby, 5-month-old baby. Everything changed. Adults got silly. They tried to play with the baby. And I remember the words of Nelson Mandela when he said the thing he missed in his 27 years was the sound of children. The sound of children. When the baby was cooing, everything stopped. People got off their cell phones. They just, but when they grow up, then it changes. That's what we abuse them, we neglect them, and say we love them. We say we love the church. I was ordained May 18, 1981, Monday at 6 p.m. at Grace Church, White Plains. And my 42 year ministry has been with children everywhere I've been, including Sing Sing. I was at Sing Sing for 10 years as a chaplain. And it's amazing, we started this program called Celebrate Children, and we bring children, as Jackie just reminded us, and Maureen, that children love their fathers even when they're locked up. And I, after 10 years, realized how much abuse went on. Both the men who abuse others, who abuse their children, to abuse themselves. They don't talk about sexual abuse, physical abuse, but they don't talk about it. And I remember Dr. Betty Shabazz coming to Newark while I was the dean of the cathedral there. And she came in 1995 or something. And she said she just flew in from LA. And Dr. Shabazz said to us, as she started to speak, that during the flight, children were being told to sit down and shut up on a plane. Remember those days, children could go to the front, they could go to the cockpit, the captain. And she said to us, what kind of society we live in that tells children to sit down and shut up? We do that in church. We do that on a bus. We do that in the subway. You saw the article about that man on a plane, who was screaming the F word at a child. I fly around, I fly a lot. So whenever I hear children crying, I get up and go to the where the sound is coming from and say, do you mind if I, especially if you're stuck on the runway and they're messy, they're crying. I said, do you mind if I walk down the aisle with, and most of them they will, they will say, okay. Especially if they have more than one child. As Victoria told you, I have a personal, not a professional pastoral story. My brother James was killed in 1976, August 3rd. My sister Ruth was killed with her boys, December 28th, 1977. My brother Joseph died escaping in Nairobi in May 2nd, 1978. In 3 years, I lost my brother James, my sister with her 2 boys, and their children, Joseph's kids, and my sister came here to live with us. I was at seminary at the time, 1981. The trauma, multi-generational trauma, I believe Maureen mentioned it, or maybe Dr. Kleiman mentioned it, that we have had. Now, they didn't even know they were babies when their parents died. But we've had a suicide in Sweden, 25 years old, a suicide in Geneva, 22, one in Uganda, the one who stayed back with my brother. So multi-generational trauma carries on. I saw it at Sing Sing, I saw it in my own family. I see it here at the church where I am now, the Church of John Paul and Clement in Mount Vernon, New York. A couple of years ago, we had a suicide in the church, young woman, 17 years old. She jumped in front of the train, and it was day after Christmas. And she has 2 siblings, 12 and 6, a girl and a boy. And the father was taking a nap, and she was 17. And the trauma still goes on. We talk to the kids. Every Saturday they come to the program. And we talk about, how are you and what are you doing? We took a trip with all of them last summer with all the kids in the church and kids in the community. We drove for 10 days through 15 states. We drove from New York to Pittsburgh to the Tree of Life, from Tree of Life to Memphis to Lorraine Motel, from Memphis to Kentucky, Breonna Taylor Square. We stopped by Muhammad Ali's house. And from there we went to Charleston, Mother Emmanuel. And from there we went to Birmingham, 16th Street Baptist Church. And then we went to Atlanta, the King Center. You hear conversations on a van as we go from place to place. I mean, some of them will tell you the best part was the swimming pool and the hotels. And that's okay to say that they're kids. But eventually you hear echoes of, maybe somebody asked them a question, as you say, Jack, to listen. Somebody listen to them. We can do this. We can do this. Judge can do this. We all can do it. And the trips we take with them, we take them to New York, the museum, and you can hear them talk in the van. You can listen, talking to each other and talk to the warden and myself, as they say, about school, about what happened, about the bullying, and then and we're going to hear more about the internet and cyberbullying. That the bullying doesn't stop; it continues. It follows you in a bedroom. It doesn't break. So both professionally, pastorally, and personally, I'm so happy you invited me to take part in this incredible session. We should do more. We should do more. All of us should be encouraged. To, we may not prevent what happened to Kara, what happened to the young woman in our church, but we can prevent others from being abused in foster care. We can make, silence is violence. I think you say that, that in church, we don't discuss it. Here, when I'm preaching, they interrupt me. When I'm preaching in the home, they'll raise their hand and ask a question. That's how, they own this space. They come in here and they say, can I ask you a question? Sure, come on. Their parents are mortified when they do that. I want to know about that. I want to know about this. And it's already been said, but Jesus said, if you hurt one of these little ones, it'd be better that a millstone, Dr. Kleiman said, would tie it around your neck and you'd be drowned in a deep sea. And also in that same chapter 19, following that chapter that quoted in Matthew, He said, let the little children come to me. And the disciples said, go away, go away. She said, let them come to me, for the kingdom of God is theirs. The kingdom of God is theirs, the babies. Like that baby at Bank Street School this afternoon, that 5-month-old baby, like all the babies. When you hear about war in Sudan, in Ukraine, think children, think children. They start the wars, but guess who suffers? Growing up in Uganda, we had refugees from Burundi, from Rwanda. Every class from first grade through the time I came to America had refugee children who had nobody, who just, like you saw them in Sudan, Ukraine. And so we can do more, we need to do more. And I'm so grateful that you're doing this, Victoria, that you invited me to be part of this incredible panel and participate in trying to do what we need to do to make a difference so that the other children will be safe. Thank you, thank you.
And it is our joy to thank you, Sabuni, for sharing your wonderful courage. And you also walk the walk and live the life of compassion and justice making and outrage for what we still hope will bring in the kingdom of God. And we try it again every single day. Thank you for being such an inspiration to me and to so many people. And we honor the personal tragedy that you have had and the experience of being dislocated, a refugee, place without a home, so many interconnections. And yet you have all spoken about the ability to listen and to show up. And I thank you. And now we have our last panelist, and we still have hopefully enough time for some questions. The danger of being the last panelist is you usually get a little shorter time. I'm so sorry, Andrew, but I know you've been on the panel enough times to forgive us for that. So without any more introduction, except to say we have a privileged opportunity to listen to the incredibly talented attorney, Andrew Santana, who has been recognized by the Biden administration as well as colleagues near and far. And he works for the wonderful agency Day One, working specifically with children up to age 24, particularly children who identify as marginalized, outcast, vulnerable, and looking for someone to listen and to care, and not to provide what they think these children need, but to listen to what the children say they need. Thank you, Andrew, for showing up and gracing us with your wonderful experience.
Thank you so much. I first want to start off by acknowledging what I imagine is this really powerful, important, hollowed out space. It sounds like these conversations in one form or another have been happening for at least a decade. And so I appreciate what it means to come into this space in this virtual format and try to contribute to a conversation that has long preceded my presence on this panel for sure. So I just want to acknowledge all the wisdom that is in this space and the conversations that have been had before me. So again, my name is Andrew Santana. I use the programs he and they. I come to this conversation with a couple different hats. I am the Director of Law and Policy at Day One. And Day One is an organization that works with young people aged 24 and under who have experienced dating or sexual violence in their relationships. And at Day One, in addition to things like legal services, we work with young people through things like counseling, one-on-one and group counseling. We do outreach to have conversations with young people and professionals in places like schools or courts, working with everyone from judges to social workers for teachers. I'm going to put our organization's website in the chat in a little bit so you can check out our resources, which include things like Know Your Rights guides. I would say this is a conversation that is really timely, and I'm happy to be a part of it. The other hat that I wear is I am a law school professor at New York Law School, where I teach a clinic on cyber harassment. So what that means is I work with third-year law students to have them develop their skills to represent people who have experienced cyber harassment, which can include things from non-consensual pornography, online stalking, and kinds of abuse. So I come to this conversation with a couple different hats and to talk about the ways under which, when we're talking about centering young people, and we're talking about the voices of young people, what does it mean to mix that conversation of prevention and intervention, and the roles perhaps that we can all play in supporting that. So I'm not sure if y'all know, but as many as 1 in 3 teenagers have experienced violence in their relationships. There are recent statistics that say that even in New York City high schools, recent studies from at least 2019 and some from 2021 that indicate 1 out of 11 high school students have experienced physical violence in their dating relationships. 1 in 12 have experienced sexual dating violence in their relationships. And I know that we've heard from previous panelists how folks will talk to their faith leaders. In our experience, talking with young people who've experienced dating or sexual violence, the last people they talk to are adults. More often, they're talking to other young people. They're often talking to other young people about their relationships, about love, about sex, about things that feel good or things that feel bad, about things that are going wrong. And part of our role at day one is to educate everybody, right? Adults, teachers, professionals, and young people themselves about healthy relationships, about boundaries, about things that feel good, about things that feel bad, about consent, so that, frankly, everyone who interacts with young people can have language and a space to be able to talk about things that are going on for them. So given the fact that 1 in 3 teens report experiencing some kind of abuse in their romantic, verbal, in their romantic relationships, which can include verbal and emotional abuse, part of the work that we do at day one, in line with folks what others said, is to believe them, right? And is to also name the things that they're experiencing as violence. Right. So part of the things we do at day one are sort of bridge the conversation between that young people are happening with each other to things that are happening in the world. Right. So I think for young people that are saying that the relations they're experiencing are full of drama or there's tension, right? What does it mean to name that experience as abuse, as stalking, as harassment, as assault, as a form of sexual violence? Some of the work that we do at day one is to create spaces where young people can talk to folks about what's actually going on for them, right? Because we know, particularly because of the work that we do in New York City, there are increased risks for women and girls of color, for Indigenous youth, for youth that identify as LGBTQ+, right? For immigrants, for pregnant and parenting teens. For the work that we do for young people at day one, we know that they're struggling and balancing many things. In addition to being young people, they're also parents, they're also workers, they're also students, they're also siblings. Sometimes many of them are living with disabilities. Many of them are folks for whom English is not their first language. Many of whom are folks whose examples of relationships and love and parenting that they get from the media, that they get from their houses, that they get from their communities, maybe aren't amazing. Maybe in the partners that they date, they're looking for things that they didn't have at home. And in those relationships, they're often trying to distinguish themselves from their families and communities, right? So for those of us working with young people at day one, we know, right, that young people in that stage of adolescence maybe haven't figured everything out yet, but maybe they don't feel like they can trust their family to talk about some of these conversations. Maybe they can't trust their teachers. That, I think I grew up, I'm 43, but I definitely grew up in this, in the 80s and 90s with this kind of romantic idea that there was a trusted adult that I could talk to, and I saw on television that there was like this one teacher, that one coach, that one person in that after school program. The reality from the experience for those of us at day one is many young people don't have that, right? If budgets are a reflection of our values, right, as many of the folks have mentioned before, then we are doing a horrible job of showing our values as it relates to young people. Day one is very fortunate to have programming in schools around the city, in high schools and middle schools, and in fact, younger, where we can partner with young people to talk to them about the things that are going on in their relationships. Again, from that place of thinking about what consent looks like, what does coercion look like, what does abuse online look like, what do boundaries look like, how to say no, how to say yes, how to say that doesn't feel good, how to be a good friend. For us at day one, all of these conversations are very much connected to what does it mean to think of young people as having agency. And through this conversation, I recognize that looks different for a 3-year-old to a 7-year-old to a 10-year-old to a 13-year-old from a 17-year-old, right? And I know from the work that we do at day one, it is incredibly important to have age-appropriate, medically accurate, LGBTQ inclusive conversations with young people about relationships, right? Often when we're talking to adults and we're talking to adult professionals about working with young people, because most of our clients are teenagers or even young adults up to age 24, they wish they had these conversations earlier. They wish that there was an adult or somebody in their community that had a conversation with them about consent, about what feels good, what feels bad, when they were earlier in high school, when they were in middle school, when they were in grade school. So I think my ask for this group is to think about what does it mean through your religious communities, through your families, through your schools, what it means to set in place spaces to have those conversations. And so I know that I want to leave space for plenty of time to talk about the questions that I think are burning, sort of potentially in the comments or the chat section. But I do want to tie this conversation very much to what it means to be a young person today, what it means to be a young person living through a climate crisis, what it means for a young person who has lived through 3 years of a horrible pandemic, what it means to be a young person in the context of much legislation around the country that essentially has to silence and erase the experiences of LGBTQ young people and the people who love them. To be a young person in a society that frankly still does not value Black and brown lives, right? And so when we think about what distinguishes, me as an adult from young people today, young people through social media, through their connections online, are learning about all of the things that are happening in the world and are frankly way more articulate than I am about it, right? Young people today have been introduced to concepts that frankly I learned in grad school, right? They have familiarity and language on many things that it took me a long time to understand. And, right, because I think in this space in particular, we can hold multiple truths once, many complex things at once. And what support and guidance from adults who will just listen, who will step back, who will come from a place without judgment, who will come from a place just understand what's going on with them without necessarily trying to fix it. For those of us who are adults with young people, there is certainly space for advice from the when I was young sort of framework. And there is space, frankly, to create an intergenerational conversation that is just based on listening, that is just based on thinking about what allyship looks like. Because in a world where we're obviously acknowledging that the children these days maybe are not all right? I haven't, this is my first pandemic, certainly, but for many young people, they're operating in a space, right, in a mode of survival. And through this time, young people have always been early adopters of technology because, right, they're living on the vanguard, right? So young people are building relationships online. They're forming trust with people online through their apps, through social media, through texting. So all of these assumptions that perhaps many of us make as adults, that teens are obsessed with their phones or they're obsessed with tech, well, in fact, they're building relationships through that technology. And just as potentially as adults in sort of the early stages of the domestic violence movement, we thought, well, why don't you just leave that relationship? I would challenge and invite folks in this conversation to think about, well, why don't young people get off their phones, right? When in fact, their phones, right, that technology, that space where they can experience non-consensual pornography, bullying, harassment, and assault are also spaces where they're seeking community self-empowerment and support. As a law school professor, I always say technology can be used as a tool, an instrument of power and control for dating, domestic or sexual violence, but it can also be used as an instrument of community awareness and empowerment, right? So I want us to hold all of those complexities simultaneously The other thing that I'll say as we move towards a Q&A piece of this conversation is I want to be clear, right? Technology in and of itself, as we're talking about online harassment, about harms, about stalking, it is frankly a new use for an old harm, a new method for that old harm. And that old harm being violence against women and girls, violence against people of color, violence against LGBTQ people. And in fact, for folks whose experiences overlap with many or all of those things, including experiences of language, of immigration, of disability, of discrimination against somebody because of how young they are, all of those things are happening simultaneously. And so when we think of technology as an instrument of violence, we also recognize it is connected to things that have been around a lot longer than many young people today. And all of us in this conversation have a role in preventing it. And I say, here are some tools to do that, right? I would say take a look at the website, Day One's website. We have Know Your Rights guides, right? So people are connected to information. Young people can get connected to information that might be informative to them, so they can reach out if in their life they might have a trusted adult. If in their life there's someone on this Zoom has created space where they can talk to somebody about what's actually going on for them. So with that said, I'm going to pause here and open up and sort of give it back to our esteem panel, because I know that there's plenty of conversation yet to be had. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Andrew. This is Paul Feuerstein, co-chair. You should see a button on your screen that says questions and answers, and would invite you to type in your questions there. I will be monitoring that and then repeat questions to the panelists as they come in. But Christina, who's a member of our task force, has an initial question to start us off.
Thanks for that, Paul. Thank you, everyone. As the newest member of the task force on domestic violence and sexual assault, I want to thank you all for those amazing talks and absolutely brilliant inputs into what is it that we can do for children of our society, but also really understand how violent the current context is. My specific question is for Andrew, because you touched upon the aspects of technology, and I was curious to understand what's your take on the most recent hearing that happened with the TikTok CEO, and his pushback to that hearing was that TikTok as a platform allows people to be creative and curious, essentially touching upon freedom of speech, freedom of being on TikTok. So how do we sort of balance, these social media protocols that are typically decided by the state vis-a-vis the safety of children and young adults, vis-a-vis their freedom or their wanting to be creative and curious on the platform itself. And again, when it comes to harm that is sort of channeled through social media, through TikTok in particular, or through some of these similar platforms, is not just sexual in nature, but some of it is also racist, emotional, all kinds of violence. So what is your take on, how do we balance these two things on either side of the scale?
Thank you so much for that question. And, I feel like I could probably talk about this for half an hour, maybe even longer. But here's how we'll start. I'll start by saying that when we talk about young people's access to technology, right, I think it's important to recognize that it is an integral part of how young people build relationships, how they communicate, and how, frankly, there's so much innovation that's happening there, right, in terms of creativity, whether it be art or self-expression. And I think, with my hat as a lawyer on, there are huge gaps with respect to the responsibility of social media companies or even internet service providers or folks at large with respect to how young people are navigating those spaces. What are the requirements, for example, to address bullying behavior, sexually explicit images or videos, or even really being clear about what the limitations of those social media platforms are. So without getting into it too much, I think we live, frankly, in a legal framework, at least in the United States, that can learn a lot from other countries. So in New York, in the United States, for example, we have laws such as, Section 230 of the Communications section, sorry, I forget the name of it, but basically there's basically federal laws that indemnify internet companies from liability. So I think we need reform in terms of that on one level. And then secondly, I think, I don't know about how many of y'all read the terms of service when you sign up for an internet for a service platform. I don't, right? I don't think that our society does a good enough job about advising people on what their rights are and what are the limitations of those rights. So for example, when I think about bullying on platforms like TikTok or Instagram, I don't know about you, but it's basically impossible to get someone on the line to talk about when there's harassing behavior. Certainly you can flag something, but I think for folks who are experiencing immediate danger, it's not very comforting. So I think we have a long way to go in terms of creating a legal and cultural and societal framework that protects young people, gives them information about what their rights are and their agency. And I would say that's not going to stop young people from going online. That's not going to stop young people from creating accounts that their parents don't know about. That's not going to stop young people for, whether it be trying to explore their sex and sexuality, to doing dance numbers, to saying mean things to each other on social media platforms, on gaming platforms, on messages, right? We're not going to all of a sudden turn off the cameras in everybody's phones. So I think it is that mix of understanding where young people are at today, understanding the role that technology plays in their lives, and doing a better job of frankly holding social media companies accountable, but also having frank conversations with young people about what it means to build relationships with each other online, right? Because through the pandemic, if the way that they talk to other young people was to tell them their secrets, what does it mean when you text a friend your immigration status, your medical status, the fact that you identify as LGBTQ, right? Because when that information is out there, it's out there. And so I think there are plenty of conversations to have with young people and the people that love young people about what those things look like, the consequences, and of course the opportunities to build community and find support.
I've been monitoring the Q&A, and as of this point, no questions have come forward. I'm wondering if we could invite our panelists, if the folks who have presented tonight have questions for each other, as we have just a few more minutes to go. Otherwise, Pietro, I think we were inviting you to do a final prayer, and then there's going to be something shared at the very end.
Paul, can I ask Sabuni a question?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, Sabuni. So at last general convention last year in Baltimore, there was a resolution that was put forward. Actually, there were two resolutions. I was the author of both resolutions, but I just want to talk about one specifically, and that is Break the Silence Sunday. So where in our churches, we can have a sermon acknowledging the people in the pews who suffered some kind of abuse, yes, and also, listen to their stories and have their voices heard. And this was passed at General Convention. Then I brought it to the Diocese of New York, and it passed at our diocesan convention. And this is supposed to happen on the first Sunday during the 16 days of activism that Paul mentioned at the beginning. And sadly to say, and I tried to get my province, which was put forward by the province too, to do something about it, to be the leader, and nothing was done. So here we are coming up now in 2023, the year after. So we've had, maybe there wasn't enough time, but we've had enough time. And I don't hear anything being mentioned about that. I've tried to have the conversation on the provincial level and nobody wants to hear it. So what would you suggest that the Episcopal Church, which has passed a resolution at General Convention authored by me, what do you suggest that we do? Because we have these conversations, but why aren't we talking about this in the pulpit? And I know Paul Fierstein does talk about domestic violence, sexual assault in the pulpit, but why? And we've chosen a Sunday to do it. Why are we not doing it? And what can have us do it?
Well, I think all the panelists have given an answer, Yvonne. I think all of us, me, you, Paul, Victoria, and others. I mean, when the young lady, they were 17 years old, my God, when she jumped on the train on Christmas 2 years ago, you know, I asked if we could have it. Oh, no, we can't, you know, why are we discussing that? Interesting enough, Yvonne, everyone I talked to thought it was a white kid. When I said, you know, 17-year-old girl killed herself, jumping, oh, it must be, I said, no, it's one of us. I know the kid. I baptized the father, you know, so I know the mother. I know that, you know, so there is a sense in which we try to avoid, Yvonne. We try to get, you know, carried away with all sorts of church business. What if we made this church business priority? We have an opportunity, by the way, for all of us. There's a transition coming. I think that Matt Hyde, the new Bishop Coadjutor, will be consecrated May 20th. I think we have an opportunity to set the agenda for the incoming episcopate. I think with Victoria and you and Paul and others, I think we can make this an agenda item, because we can't just talk the talk and not walk the walk. As Victoria said, we have to, you know, and your presence both at the national level, at provincial level, at national level as a leader, and worldwide, not just in this country, but worldwide, from England to Africa to other places. I think we have an opportunity here. I really do. I think we have an opportunity to push this agenda because, you know, I don't know who said it, Jackie or Maureen. Somebody said silence is violence. I think, you know, when I try to get somebody to come and talk to us about suicides among teenagers, no. Why are we talking about that? Why are you taking the kids over in Pittsburgh and those places? Why can't you take them to somewhere more interesting? Well, that's the real life, and the light shines in dark places. So you're one of those lights, Yvonne, that has shined, and Paul and Victoria, and here we are. I think there's an opportunity. He's being consecrated May 20th at the cathedral, and I think there's a new era that, you know, we can. I don't know if someone else wants to jump in, but that'd be my answer. I don't know if any other panelists. Thank you for the question.
I'd like to jump in very briefly. I hear the intersectionality of all of these dedicated ways to do something to make a difference. And I want to hear from the panelists, and we're getting perilously over time.
Yes.
So I apologize if you need to leave. By all means, I think we should perhaps invite everyone to stay an extra 10 minutes if they want. If not, we send our blessed wishes and welcome and good night. Please remember to be good to yourself. These are hard topics. Be extra careful tomorrow. Remember to hang on to that hope. And the light is in everyone, not just people who have made a splash already. You know, we don't own it. It belongs to everybody. And that's this little light of mine. I'm going to let it shine. And I just, I know that there are people on this call that are doing incredibly wonderful work. We don't know. We have a beautiful prayer in the prayer book. That's we thank God for the people whose faith is known only to God.
That's right.
Thank you.
So are we going to pray now and have the petition? Is that?
Yes, that's happening.
You want me to pray now, Paul?
Absolutely.
Okay. It's called a children's prayer, but I wanted to mention, some of you remember the poster, the Children's Defense Fund poster, remember that? It says, "My boat is so small and the sea so wide." Remember that?
Yes.
Remember that poster? Yeah. That the sea so wide and my boat so small. But here we go with this prayer. Thank you, God. Thank you, God, for the birds and the animals, the flowers and the trees, the lakes, and the stars and the sun that rises and sets over each day. Thank you for creating everything that we see. Thank you. Thank you, God, for everything that we see. Thank you for the life of the children, making each one of us so different from each other in your image. And all these prayers we offer in your name. Amen.
Thank you to all who came tonight. Thank you for the questions and the answers and the more questions. Thank you for sharing from your hearts. We have something to offer in the brief space of time. This was from a program that was coordinated in 2021 with the National Organization to Prevent Sexual Assault. As a national leader, there we go. Thank you very much. And thank you to Beth Ann and Mike for doing such a wonderful job tonight with the tech support. We can't do it without you both. So thank you so much. This is an option for everyone who's still on the call who might like to. Don't worry about the 2021. It's good to go from 21 to Kingdom Come. If you would like to be part of the solution, then consider, as Gandhi said, be the change. This is a good start, and you can Xerox it till your heart's content and pass it out in your communities, your schools, your neighborhoods. Doesn't have to be a faith institution. This is for everyone who would like to feel that they can make a difference. And we'll see where the ripples go. Wouldn't it be wonderful if there was an outpouring of support, a proclamation?
Good.
And if you can't find it, or it's too late after you're ready to turn this Zoom off, get back to any of us on the task force. Paul or me particularly have put our telephone numbers out on the flyers. Please feel free to come back to us and say, I'd like to have a conversation with the panelist, or I have a question now that I couldn't speak for, because sometimes it takes time. And I'm so grateful that the church has been willing to take these very difficult topics that the church doesn't want to talk about and make a beginning. So thank you for all your bravery and your courage, listeners and speakers. And go forth in the power of the Holy Spirit for Christians, for Jesus, for Shekinah, for whomever, the goddesses, whatever, or just for humanity. Doesn't
Amen.
have to. Yeah.
Thank you.
Go forth.
Thank you. Thank you. Bless you.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you for caring. Namaste. And the Lord be with you.
Namaste.